Hello, this is Wayne Roseray from Software Testing. Today I'm going to talk about testing from requirements before the code is written, before you have a chance to watch anything run, instead looking at things like state diagrams or BDD Gherkin style expressions of what the application can do. I'm going to show how to look at both of those style of describing requirements and applying a couple of simple techniques to find ways where the requirements are ambiguous, insufficient, indicate problems that haven't been addressed and are bugs in the product, and maybe even suggest new features that need to be added to address maybe modes that the app can get into. It's a fun way to test software. It's a good way to get ahead of a problem and help the product team uh, identify things before they even happen, which is one of the best ways to approach testing. So let's go in and take a look. I'm going to talk about testing from requirements. Give an example of what that might look like, forms that it might take. I'm going to do this from a project of my own called DupeIQ. The prime point of the app is to identify duplicate failures that might be reported as bugs, might be issues coming back from users, or initially I designed it for reporting, identifying duplicates coming from automation system reports of failure. And the primary way it works is a report comes in, a lookup is performed against the database to see if there are similar issues that have been reported before. And if there's a similar issue reported before, the new report is linked to the similar issue. If it's nothing is similar enough, then a new issue is created and the report is linked to that and saved to the database. So that's a rough description of the feature. I'm going to talk about how we might look at requirements material to see if we can find possible bugs in the requirements so far. Do the requirements lack something? Is there something missing? Is there a conflict in what might be happening with requirements? So I've got a state diagram inside TestCompass, which describes it visually. I have also taken this exact same um, diagram and created a feature document which expresses it in Gherkin format. So, we as if we're doing a behavior-driven design, uh, behavior-driven development with it. And let's take a look at this in the Gherkin. So the feature is the report new issue feature, and the scenario is we're reporting an issue. And so given there is an issue has been reported or has come in, when the similarity is greater than whatever threshold is specified, when that's yes, then link the new issue to link the report to the prior issue. I got that misspelled there. And then write the issue report to the database. So in the case where you've already got something, all we need to do is make sure that the report links to the prior one and we record the report. Now, the other case is given an issue has been reported, if the similarity is not greater than the threshold, okay, we don't have a good match, then we have to write the embeddings for a new issue somewhere. We write a new issue profile, and then we write the issue report to the database. And I guess there's an implied and link new issue to report issue that should be in there. So like actually I made a mistake in my model. And if you think about it, that's a bug in the requirements alone because it's missing a step that should be implied by coming out of the model. So this is what I think it would look like. So I'd call that's a bug. Let's report that as a bug. And we can fix that right now in the model. Where was it? It was on the no branch. Let's go into this. So given an issue has been reported when top issue similarity threshold is no, then write new issue embeddings, and it would come in here. I'll find a nice way to do that. I'm going to just copy another one of these. And you know what? This is just a thing with TestCompass. When it tries to construct the Gherkin, it wants a really strict then and format. You can't go from an and to a then, but you can go from a then to an and. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of that, but starting with an and instead, and say and link new issue. Actually, let's link report to new issue. Actually, so it's a different step. It doesn't just say prior issue. And I'm going to change the spelling on this. Link report to prior issue, because that's really what it meant. That's another bug in the requirements. It's a typo, a spelling mistake, but it creates some confusion. We really meant link report to prior issue. We really meant that to be the report. So that will give us a correct expression of what's really happening. And then, we write the new issue profile and write the issue. So the new issue profile is written in this sequence, and the issue report is written to the database in both. The link is different because it's to a new thing versus a prior. So that's the way this executes. It creates two requirements. We can recreate that. I'm not going to say changes that. Might as well go ahead and recreate that feature document. And it created a new one, and it's got that little parentheses one on there because it's a conflict with the file name. But we're good there. Okay, but now let's take a look at this new. Let's look at it both from the Gherkin and from the and from the visual. Either way, it's good. But I like to pop back and forth because you might be dealing with it in either format. Let's look at the way this is written. Because when I wrote this model, I just kind of went off the head of a real top fast, what's happening expression of it, which people are inclined to do. I wasn't trying to make anything wrong with the model. It's just the way my brain put it together right away. And when we look at it, we say, okay, an issue has been reported, and when the top issue similarity is greater than threshold. So, the first question that we've got is, where did the similarity come from, right? How do we know what it is, right? It's like there's magic happening in between here and here, right? We could ask about, what does it mean? What does link mean in this case? And that could be clarified. That's just a little ambiguous. I know what it means. What it means is that when the issue report is written to the database, there's a column on it that identifies the ID of whatever the prior issue was that matches on the similarity. But there's this magic happening here. How does this even happen? What are we talking about? What is the top issue? Where does it come from? How do you establish the similarity? And we've got the same issue on this one, so that I believe the answer should carry through. And then it says, then write new issue embeddings, link report to new issue, write new issue profile, write issue report to database. All right, so this is what are embeddings? Where do they go, right? And actually, that's likely. So on the database, we say write issue report to database. What database is this? And we've got the same thing with these two. What database is this? And likewise. Okay. Now I'll just put quotes for indicating the same thing. So already looking at the requirements as written, there's some ambiguity here that may not matter from the user flow perspective, right? Does the user of this feature care where the embeddings are stored, where the profile is stored, where the report is stored? Does the user care how the similarity is calculated? No, I don't think they do. But some of what has to happen to make that happen might expose other requirement behaviors which should be articulated here that are not. So sometimes, these things that you think don't matter to an end user start to matter once you start answering these questions, right? And so let's talk about that for just a little bit. And I am the author on this feature, so I am in an authority to describe that. The way this works is that I'm going to use the comment bubbles and things to describe what happens here. So and we can fix that up a little bit. We'll pop out, give myself some room. So what happens here is that get embeddings from embeddings model. Okay, so there's a component called an embeddings model, and then there is do embeddings search on vector DB to get similarities or to get similar entries. Okay, so right now we see that there is a, as we explain this, in the step that goes from just having an issue being reported to looking up the similarity, that something has some embeddings need to be fetched, and then we need to do a search against a vector database to get similar entities, right? So there's some steps there, and then we can likewise answer some questions here. This is like store embeddings in vector DB. Okay, so that's what this really meant, was storing the embeddings in the vector DB, and then likewise we could say issue profiles and reports are in issue database. Okay, so let's pretend these comment bubbles are the conversation between whoever's asking these questions and the developer, or at least the architect of the system. And what else did I bring up as questions? I think I got all the questions. How do we know what it is? Okay, we got that from the vector database search. What does link mean in this case? I'm not going to put that in the comments there. It's actually a trivial matter because it just goes with the right. What are embeddings? Where do they go? We can have a conversation about that. But let's look at what we've raised. So the questions that we had on this have introduced. Well, we already had 2 bugs that came up that we fixed already in the model, right? Like we added a step and stuff, but now we've got this question here too. There's a arguably 4 different bugs that were in the model itself in its ambiguity, right? And so now we got to say, okay, well, let's fix the model, right? Let's fix the requirements so that it makes more sense, right? Or fits what we really need it to do. So let's add some stuff here, right? And I'm going to treat this as an action first. So, and I'm just going to stay and get embeddings, get embeddings, and then I'll just take that out as a comment because I've addressed it, and then we'll say and search vector DB for similar issues. Okay, now let's link that up here because it's a little squishy. Okay, and I'll get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got a sequence there that reflects our path to finding the similarity threshold. And then actually we've got distinct steps here for write new issue embeddings, so that's fine. And link to report to new issue, and write new issue profile, write issue report to database. Okay, so I'm going to say, you know what, the shape of this actually explained that. We just had a conversation. I'll leave these here just so that it's clear that they've been explained, but we didn't have to add a new node to explain it. Okay, so let's call the ambiguity issues addressed. All right, and now let's do something else other than looking for ambiguities. Although actually, let's do this. Let's go ahead and make our new test case. It's still the same number of test cases, but now what's happening is there's more details. So let's generate that feature file. It's report issue 2, and let's look at it from there. Notepad, and I'll zoom this up a little bit just to make this easier to see. And here's a trick that I like to do as a tester when going through sequences of steps. And it's a technique that I borrowed from failure modes and effects analysis, which is a way of looking for what happens with failure in a given system. And just the question I'm going to ask is, what happens if this step fails? Right? I'm not even going to necessarily, it's enough just to ask that question, right? And to go through on each of these, like, you know, what happens if it fails? It doesn't even make it sense that it fails here, right? Is you know, like the first filter on that. And then what are the modes it can fail is the next question, because the modes, the way that it fails might affect the continued behavior. But the most critical thing is like a lot of times when you say what happens to this step fails, usually whatever sequence it is interrupted, right? Or something that's supposed to happen in that state doesn't propagate through, and the subsequent steps are trying to act on something that's not good. So let's just use that as a technique. It's a great technique for reviewing a sequence. Works really well. And so let's just take these in the BDD format in Gherkin and just ask it. So given an issue has been reported, I'm just going to take that at face value. Okay, it's the truth that we're given on the way in. I'm not going to consider failure to that because it's just the assumption that we've got something to report and we're passing it into the system. And so let's go for the first thing. What happens if it fails when we get embeddings? You know, failure, you know, what failure here, you know, what happens? It seems as if there's nothing to do the rest of this with, right? Expect report error, right? It doesn't seem like there's anything that could happen from here. Although it'd be interesting to see what would happen if like the failure to get embeddings was ignored and the code kept proceeding. You know, what kind of bug ripples out of that? But we don't know yet because it hasn't been written, right? There's nothing implied by this that there is something bad happening yet other than that failure. But, you know, we're saying, hey, we should clarify what we should do. And you know what? Let's go failure here. You know, what happens? Likewise, you know, let's say we call and we don't get results back, or we get an error back from that call. And again, it seems we don't have anything to go on, right? That ripples down. We just want to report an error, I think, right? From, you know, and so we would say, okay, on both of these, we think maybe report an error, and that's missing from the requirements. Requirements doesn't talk at all what the error should be like. This is just a decision thing. That's a yes or a no. I'm not going to look at failure on this one. This, I'm going to pretend that this is wrapped up in the next step. But if we say failure here, right? Again, we're trying to write a thing, and it's the first thing that we've tried to write, and there doesn't seem to be any follow-up processing. Based on the way everything is described so far, it looks like maybe the correct thing is just to report an error. So we could say that here, right? And if we want to diagram that, that would be as if, we went through this sequence and then got here, and there was a failure getting them. So the question marks, what had happened here? And then likewise, got here, and there's a failure getting the calling to the vector DB. And then here's the decision, and then the yes comes out here, and then there's a failure here. What should we do in that case? And so it feels like there is some way of talking about indicating failure off this, indicating failure off that, and indicating failure off that. So that's the way we wrote that. Let's look down at the next case, right? Issue reported, get embeddings. These so far, all the way up to here, feel identical to the first two because it feels like we should just bail at this point. But in the case where it doesn't exceed the threshold, we've got a different action. We're writing the new issue embeddings for this thing reported, right? So that's interesting. It's a different, it's a write operation for one thing. Failure here. What do? We were unable to record the embeddings, so expect report error, and I would expect some kind of abort or something, because there's more writing to do. Okay, but let's pretend we got past this. There was no error. Link report to new issue. Write new issue profile. Now this is getting interesting because we just had a successful write operation, and this is important. If you remember from our diagram, this database and this database are two different databases. A vector database and an issue database frequently are in very different technologies. Sometimes you can have the same kind of database system that will do both vector stuff and regular relational database stuff in the same database, but frequently they're optimized differently. And so the notion of having like a transaction that spans both of these and guarantees you cannot do part of them, you have to do the whole thing or nothing. You usually can't do that when you have them separate like this, right? Or across a vector database and a regular database. And so right away we've got a problem here, because if we got this far and had a failure here, it means we got data that we already wrote, right? And this seems bad. This seems like orphaned embeddings, right? Whatever we wrote for new issue, cleanup, report error, right? Right, because we didn't succeed in this attempt, right? So we definitely want to report an error one way or another. But do we need to clean up that orphan, right? That seems like a problem. And I would say that we've got a similar failure here, a similar kind of thing, although what we have now is an issue profile without related issue report, which may or may not be a actual bad state of the system. If you can imagine someone reported an issue, it was brand new, a new profile was created for it, and then after the fact came in and said, I want to delete that report, but I want that issue still in there in case something else matches to it, So it may or may not be a cleanup, but say what to do, because that's not certain, right? but also definitely we want to report the error. We want to say we're not able to create that report. So what have we got here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bugs that we've identified now with the design as it is on paper, right? It's like we've got really these failure modes that come of the steps that are necessary to write into the system, and at least one of them creates orphan data, right? So that's troubling. That's not so good. So let's talk about how do we address that in the design, right? And usually with things like this, it means that there's missing conditionals to address the error state. I'm going to move some stuff around and which makes some room essentially for things. I'm going to get rid of this comment here because I believe what we're going to do is make that more explicit, make it more obvious that's happening. And let's do some changes here in the design to account for it. Because it's going to be interesting when we introduce these, what do we got to deal with? So let's change and get embeddings to when embeddings fetch succeeds. Let's call it that. We got to make it a little bigger now because the words don't fit. Okay. And then likewise, let's go and let's go and vector search succeeds and string that to this. Okay, because that's actually these are accounting for the error possibility, but now we need to change this and to a when. Something I've conveyed to the folks at TestCompass that this mix and matching of proper Gherkin format is a little challenging to deal with. But now look at what we've got here, right? We've got 2 no conditions we haven't accounted for. Now, fortunately, in this case, we don't have any data persisted to the system yet. So what we might be able to do is get away with, then report embeddings error, right? And likewise, we might be able to say then report vector search error. Now, these are these. One of the frustrating things about errors is sometimes you have an error that the end user can do something about, and sometimes you don't. And I believe this is actually a case where there's not much the end user can do. Okay. You might give them something saying, sorry, not your fault, but we're having a problem. Please call back later, or some kind of session ID they can use if they need to talk to support or whatever. But really, this is a problem that is more for operations to look at and say, why are we having these problems? Okay, which brings up, I'll tackle this now, brings up an implied new behavior, right? Which is a new result, because this thing forces us into stringing results once you've got results. And let's say log failure to operations. Let's spell that right. So I would call this, the lack of this being on there, I'd call, actually I want to link it down from the bottom, and then I'd call the lack of this being on there possibly a bug on the design if someone hadn't put it in right away. I would hope that someone looking at these, let's say this went back to the tester to say, okay, we're going to report these errors. As a tester, or anybody, developer, program manager, someone on the team, one of the questions, I'll just jot this down in our little in our little list of things for errors. What is the user going to do with this error message, right? There's a little rule of thumb, heuristic guideline that you should always ask in testing when someone says, well, we'll report the error. You say, okay, when the end user gets that error, what can they do? And the answer to these is, like I said, nothing. So as a tester or anybody evaluating this, you should say, we should do something with the error that somebody can take some action, which that's what this log failure to operations is about, so that somebody can be keeping track of, oh, look, there's a bunch of, search database lookups failing. Is the connection down? Is the server down? Are we using an external service? Are we having trouble with it? And we can start looking at that and deal with it operationally and things like that. So, these things kind of grow in our requirements as we talk about it. Let's get over to the other set of requirements where we were looking at the database write failures. And, this gets a little tricky because we've got a sequence of results that are a little hard to manage in the way Gherkin wants us to stick things together and the way TestCompass wants to represent that. But let's just let's look at this as a similar kind of conditionals. So in top issue similarity is greater than threshold. So in that case, that's the easier one. We say write to issue database succeeds. Okay, and again, make that a little bigger. And for yes, we're good on the way out, right? Let's make some room there. And for no, we might just be able to get away with saying, yeah, let's just say, we report, then report issue report database failure, issue database failure. It's a specific one for recording the issue, and I'd like to differentiate there, but we're also going to, log that because the end user can't do too much, right? Write to issue database succeeds. Let's look at it, but this one's a simpler, right? It's like either it goes through and we're good, or it doesn't, and we've just got to report that it didn't record what we wanted it to record. This one's trickier because this one has the two different database writes, the embeddings written here, and then the issue profile and the issue report recorded here. So we're going to likewise need to link up a set of conditions to talk about that. Okay. And let's go and write to embeddings succeeds. And then likewise a condition for and write to issue database succeeds. And you know what? I'm gonna assume that we wrap up the writing of the issue report and the issue profile in a transaction in the same database, which allows us to not have one orphan the other, so that at least if we get as far as writing the issue report succeeding, likewise so with the issue profile, so they wind up not happening together if they don't happen, or succeeding together no matter what, because transactional systems are like that. So let's say that this is the success path, okay, where we get all three of these going together just fine, and there's no problems, right? let's say this write to embeddings doesn't succeed. We have a failure. So we'll get a simple error report on that. Then report embeddings write fail. Okay, and we'll log that out. So we've got that logged. And now let's talk about the more complex one, and where the embeddings succeeded, but the write to the issue database fails. Okay, so this creates. I'm gonna create this as a intermediary idea here. If you think about that, this creates an orphan. Okay, and so with that, we've got then orphan exists, embedding orphan. I'm going to say it's an embeddings orphan. Exists, report failure. This one is interesting because it suggests something in terms of other requirements. But let's talk about this one. So let's say that was the design, right? And so now we've got all of these error cases covered. We have, the case where the database write doesn't succeed on a new issue. We report that failure. We've got where it doesn't succeed on prior issue. And where the embeddings, we just say, hey, we couldn't do this. And then we get a failure on the right of the profile, and we say, well, now we've got an orphan in the system. We're going to tell the user about it. We're also going to log it to operations and go to the end. And this creates an interesting condition, right? Let's say you send this back to someone who's reviewing it, a program manager, a tester, an end user, stakeholder, someone like that. You say, yeah, we got this thing, and we got two different databases, and you can't transact across them, and sometimes an orphan just exists. Okay, there's two implications here, right? One, this implies there's an orphan removal feature, right? And so let's make a comment about this, orphan removal feature, right? And what's that even going to look like? This is like a whole new set of requirements that fall out of this, possibly. I'm trying to make this so it's readable, which aren't even on this diagram yet. It might need to be a special new feature that we've got to add in. And so the requirements grow when you contemplate, oh, wow, the way the system works is just begging for orphan data under certain failure modes. And so we got to say, well, how do you tell the user there's orphans? How do they manage which ones they're going to deal with? How does the system find them, present them, and such? Does there need to be a separate log on them that says this orphan is, there? But there's another thing here, which is like we could treat this as something we try to fix. I don't think we can get rid of it 100%, but let's, I'm going to move this out of the way. We say, well, what if this thing had said, and orphan deletion works. Okay, so now we at least have a situation where we can say, look, we'll try to get it, because we know the embeddings still. We know what they were. We wrote them to the system here, and that was I disconnected the wrong one. It's this one, and it's this one here. Okay, and it's ugly, and it's bouncing around and stuff like that. We can do a better job drawing later, different time. But if orphan deletion works, then we can just report a failure, right? and be done with it. So let's just call that then report issue creation failure, right? We're not issuing a report, we're not recording the new issue, and we will likewise log failure to the system. But if that still didn't work, then we've got an issue, an orphan still in the system, and we're still begging for this issue orphan removal feature, right? So now it's all jumbled and everything, but we have a much different looking design that came out of testing it. In testing by trying ideas out, asking clarification. What the two methods. One is asking for clarification on ambiguous steps. Anything that looks like magic happens here, or you have to ask, where does this go? How does this happen? Force the design to flesh that out. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step was, you saw that in this document here. I just introduced a little guiding heuristic technique where I said, on every single one, I'm going to ask, what happens if this step fails? And then see what logically is implied by the design, or ask the question if it's not logical, if it's not clear. And that led to this expansion that we see now, from the very small model that we had before to this very large one that we have now. So, and much more complex, much richer, and covering several states, and leading us to some problems that we still don't have just by applying those techniques, right? And then, there was a follow-on technique, which I pulled up for error messages. This isn't the only technique. There's a lot of others you can say. You can say, well, what if I change the step and I say the user did something else, or. But it doesn't matter. All you have to do is just try take a technique and walk the steps. Either walk through the model visually, like we were doing a little bit of, or inside the BDD, like we were doing. And this all came from, this is cool, this all came from just two Gherkin expressions. Two Gherkin expressions exploded into this list of bugs that we found. I'm going to do something now. Let's take a look at, I'm going to generate test cases. Okay, so now this comes up with 8 cases, right? So we have a 4-fold expansion of it just by asking some questions. And let's generate the feature file. And okay, report issue 3. And let's look at the Gherkin that results from that, right? Because, and here we are. We've got now 8 of these that all explain the states that we were concerned with as we were looking at the system, and much more detailed, much better arrangement of some things that we got to look out for. And by doing this, we wind up with a set of things that development can pay attention to as they're writing the feature. We don't necessarily have to wait until everything gets to the end-to-end system before we can test these conditions. Develop can write these, encapsulate these in unit tests, right? Can build in failure handling modes, even talking to the database. You wrap the database accessors properly, the developer can simulate that as they're writing the code, which makes testing a lot easier for the end-to-end system stuff. And as we noticed here, we've got a whole new feature we need to contemplate. How is dealing with embedding orphans going to happen? There's a whole new design sector that we got to go down, a whole new set of requirements to look at for that. So that's an example of testing from requirements. Drawing pictures, making lists, coming up with ideas that challenge it in a very practical and simple way. It's not that hard to do. It just takes the imagination and the intention of going through it. So that was that. I'm going to call this one done. Thank you very much.